Have you ever gone to receive communion, placed the host in your mouth, and it stuck to the roof of your mouth, your tongue, or your teeth, remaining there and resisting for longer than normal? You probably thought it was something physical, that your mouth was dry, that the host was thicker, or that it was simply a coincidence with no meaning. But what if it was not? Padre Pio, who celebrated Mass for decades and had a relationship with the Eucharist that few human beings in history have ever come close to having, left direct teachings about what happens when the host sticks, about what this moment may be signaling, about what the soul needs to hear when the body experiences that unexpected resistance. There are 6 warnings, 6 messages that spiritual tradition recognizes in this moment, and at least one of them will speak directly to something you are experiencing right now. Before we begin, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell. And share this with someone you know who takes their spiritual life seriously, because this knowledge may arrive at the exact moment when someone needs it. Padre Pio cried during Massachusetts. Not occasionally, but with a regularity that amazed those who witnessed it for the first time and moved those who understood what was happening. He said that celebrating Mass was reliving Calvary, that holding the consecrated host in his hands was holding Christ himself, that communion was not a ritual, it was not a symbol, it was not a gesture of community belonging, but a real encounter with a real person. And precisely because of this, everything that happens at the moment of communion carries a weight that goes beyond the physical. The inner state with which you approach the altar, what you carry in your soul when you open your mouth to receive, and what happens at the instant when the body and the sacrament meet. The host that sticks is one of those moments that most people hurry to resolve and move on from without stopping to understand. This video is an invitation to stop, to look, and to listen to what that moment may be saying. Let us go to the first warning. The first warning is the most fundamental, and it is also the most ignored. The host that sticks may be a sign that you are receiving communion in a state of deep distraction. Not superficial distraction. The thought that passes through your mind while you walk toward the altar, the concern about the child who stayed in the pew, the sound of a crying child at the back of the church. These things are human, and God understands human limitations. Deep distraction is something else. It is arriving at the holiest moment of the Mass with your soul completely somewhere else, with your mind solving practical problems while your body moves by habit toward the altar, with your heart so closed inside your own world that the real encounter simply does not happen because you were not there to encounter him. Padre Pio said that communion received in a state of deep distraction is not invalid from a sacramental point of view. The sacrament takes place regardless of the emotional state of the faithful. But he also said that it is like receiving a gift with your eyes closed and your hands closed. The gift is there, but you did not take it. And sometimes the body registers this dissonance before the mind recognizes it. The host that sticks creates an involuntary pause, an interruption in automatic behavior, a moment in which you are forced to pay attention because something unexpected happened. This moment of pause is the warning. The question it asks is simple and direct. Where are you? No, not where your body is. Your body is in the communion line. That is obvious. But where are you? Your attention, your presence, your soul? What did you bring to this encounter? Roberta was 46 years old and had attended Mass every Sunday for more than 20 years. She was a constant presence, punctual, faithful. But there was something she had never admitted to anyone. For years, she no longer felt anything during communion. At the beginning, there had been something. A quietness, a lightness, a feeling that this moment mattered in a way that other moments did not. But with time, with routine, with life becoming heavier and faster, communion had become just another step in the ceremony. One Sunday, the host stuck in an unusual way. It remained on the roof of her mouth long enough for Roberta to stop completely. And in that pause, for the first time in years, she realized where she was. She realized that she had arrived at the altar with the weekly shopping list in her mind. She realized that she had received without being truly present to receive. She did not leave that Mass with a mystical experience. She left with a question. When was the last time I was truly here? That question changed the way she prepared for communion. It changed what she did in the minutes before approaching the altar and gradually changed the quality of something that had become empty without her realizing it. And for you, the next time the host sticks before any other interpretation, ask this question first. Where am I? It is not an accusation. It is an invitation to return. The second warning is heavier, and it requires courage to hear it. The host that sticks may be a sign that there is something unresolved between you and God that is creating an inner resistance to the encounter. Not necessarily a serious sin, not necessarily something you did and forgot, but a state of the soul that settled over time and created a kind of wall between you and the sacrament you are receiving. Padre Pio identified three main forms of this state. The first is an unoffered hurt. The second is an unconfessed doubt. And the third is spiritual pride disguised as faithfulness. The unoffered hurt is perhaps the most common. It is that situation in which you were wounded by someone in your family, by someone in your community, perhaps even by the church itself, through someone who represented it poorly. And you continue going to Mass, you continue receiving communion, but you carry a wound that was never honestly brought into prayer. It was never said to God with all the words, I am angry, I feel abandoned, I do not understand why this happened, and I am hurt. While this hurt is not named and surrendered, it creates tension. You are physically approaching the sacrament while spiritually moving away. The body goes to the altar, but the heart stays behind. The unconfessed doubt is different. It is the person who has real questions about faith, about the real presence in the Eucharist, about whether all of this is true, but does not admit these questions even to themselves because they feel that having doubts means they have failed. So they receive communion outwardly, while inwardly there is a question that has never been brought anywhere. Padre Pio had a phrase about this that is liberating. Doubt honestly brought to God is not a sin, it is prayer. The sin is pretending that the doubt does not exist while it is consuming you from within. Spiritual pride disguised as faithfulness is the most subtle of the three. It is the person who goes to Mass every Sunday, who prays the Rosary, who participates in the community, and who, without realizing it, has developed an implicit comparison between themselves and others. I am faithful. I am here. I do what needs to be done. And that person is not. That family is not. That couple who only appears at Christmas. No. This state does not look like pride because it is wrapped in genuine religious practice. But it closes the heart in the same way. Because communion is not received by the most faithful person or by the person who is the most present. It is received by the most humble. And spiritual pride, even when disguised, is the opposite of humility. Klusa was 58 years old and had stopped receiving communion for 3 months, without telling anyone the real reason. The real reason was that she had discovered that a woman from her faith community had spread a lie about her. A woman with whom Klusa prayed. A woman with whom she shared volunteer work at the parish. Someone she had trusted. She had not been able to forgive, and she knew that receiving communion while carrying that wound would be an inconsistency she could not sustain. So she stopped approaching the altar. After 3 months, a priest, during confession, said something that reached her heart. You do not need to feel forgiveness before asking for it. Forgiveness begins as a decision, not as a feeling. Ask God to do in you what you cannot do by yourself. Klusa returned to the altar the following Sunday. She had not forgiven yet. Not in the way she understood forgiveness, with the feeling resolved and the hurt healed. But she had asked God to begin that work within her. The host on that Sunday did not stick, and she understood it not as superstition, but as a symbol that something had moved. And for you, is there something unresolved between you and God that you are carrying to the altar without naming it? This does not need to be completely resolved before you approach, but it does need to be honestly presented. The third warning is one of the least obvious and one of the most important for the current moment of your life. The host that sticks may be a sign that you are going through a period of spiritual dryness and that this period has a purpose you have not yet recognized. Spiritual dryness is a theme that appears throughout the great Christian mystical tradition. Saint Teresa of Avila described it. Saint John of the Cross described it with such precision that he gave a name to the phenomenon: the dark night of the soul. Padre Pio himself went through prolonged periods in which spiritual fervor disappeared and only the dry obligation to continue remained. The problem is that most people, when they enter spiritual dryness, interpret it as a sign that something has gone wrong, that they have lost their faith, that God has moved away, that they are no longer worthy of the spiritual experience they once had. And this mistaken interpretation causes them either to distance themselves from the practice, saying, "It is not working at all," or to enter spiritual despair, trying to force back an experience that simply is not available at that moment. Tradition says the opposite. Spiritual dryness, when lived through with faithfulness, is one of the greatest possible periods of growth in the life of faith, because it is there that you discover whether you are following God or following the experience of God, whether your faithfulness is real or whether it depends on feeling good. When the host sticks during a period of spiritual dryness, it may be signaling exactly this. You are here, even without feeling anything. You continue listening even without the same fervor as before. This is a deeper faith than fervor, not a lesser one. The warning here is not about danger. It is about perseverance. Continue, not because of the experience you are hoping to have, but because of the real encounter with a real person, which does not depend on what you feel in order to be real. Aparecida was 63 years old and described her spiritual life as divided into two phases. Before the age of 50, when prayer came naturally and Mass brought a peace that she could feel in her body. And after the age of 50, when everything had dried up. She had tried everything: retreats, prayer groups, different styles of Mass, spiritual books. Nothing had rekindled what existed before, and she had reached a point of almost giving up. Not giving up on faith itself, but giving up on the practice, because it seemed useless to continue doing something that produced no noticeable result. It was during a conversation with an older religious woman that she heard something that completely changed her perspective. The religious woman said, "Do you know the difference between who you are today and who you were before the age of 50? Before 50, you went to Mass to receive something. Now you go without receiving anything noticeable, and you still go. That is mature faith. What you had before was beautiful, but it was the faith of a child. What you have now is much more valuable, even if it does not appear that way." Aparecida did not return to feeling what she felt before, but she stopped interpreting the absence of feelings as the absence of God. And this change in interpretation transformed the dryness into fertile ground. If you are experiencing spiritual dryness, the host that sticks is not confirmation that God is distant. It may be exactly the opposite, a sign that you are being invited to a level of faith that does not need feelings in order to be real. The fourth warning enters territory that few people discuss openly because it seems excessive, it seems medieval, it seems like something from a time that has already passed. But Padre Pio did not have this hesitation, and that is why this video will not have it either. The host that sticks may be a sign that there is a negative spiritual influence acting upon you, creating resistance to the sacrament. Padre Pio was an exorcist, not occasionally. It was something that was a central part of his ministry, and he knew, with a clarity that came from decades of direct experience, that negative spiritual forces have a specific relationship with the Eucharist. The Eucharist, in Catholic theology, is the real presence of Christ, not symbolic, real. And everything that opposes Christ opposes the Eucharist. This is not theory. It is the internal logic of what the faith professes. A negative spiritual influence, whether through practices that open doors that should not have been opened, through connections with people or environments that carry negative influences, or through reasons that sometimes even the person herself cannot identify, creates a tension at the moment of communion. It does not prevent the sacrament from taking place, but it creates a disturbance, a resistance, something that the body may register before the mind understands it. What are the practices that most commonly open these doors? Consulting mediums, even when done out of curiosity or pain, especially seeking communication with deceased people. The use of objects from other religions within a practice that mixes Catholic faith with incompatible elements. Involvement, even superficial involvement, with practices of witchcraft or superstitions, including those that appear harmless because they have been culturally normalized. And also, in a less obvious way, relationships of emotional or spiritual dependence on people who carry intense negative influences. The warning here is not condemnation. It is honest evaluation. Is there something in your life, past or present, that may have opened a door that should not have been opened? If the answer is yes, the solution is not fear. It is sacramental confession, which has a specific power to close these doors, and, if necessary, seeking a priest with training in spiritual accompaniment. Veronica was 35 years old and had grown up in a family where Catholicism and some spiritualist practices existed together without anyone seeing a contradiction. Sunday Mass and consulting a medium when things became difficult. Praying the rosary and the superstitions her grandmother taught her, which everyone practiced because they had always seemed to work. When she married, her husband, who came from a stricter Catholic family, began questioning these practices. She entered a long process of discernment, but what made her make a decision was not a theological discussion. It was what she herself began to notice during communion. A growing uneasiness when approaching the altar, difficulty concentrating during the moment of receiving, and, on some occasions, a physical resistance that she had never experienced before, including the host sticking in ways she could not explain only by dryness of the mouth. She brought this to a long confession with a priest she respected. She did not only confess specific practices, but also asked for a prayer of deliverance. And after that confession, something changed. She described it as if a background noise that had always been there had been turned off. She did not attribute it to superstition. She attributed it to spiritual logic. Open doors need to be closed, and the sacrament, together with confession, has the power to do this. This question is not meant to create anxiety. It is meant to create honesty. If there is something open doors that should not have been opened, the sacrament of reconciliation is available, and it has real power for what the situation requires. The fifth warning is about something that happens not in your relationship with God, not in past practices, but in the present moment of your external life. The host that sticks may be a sign that you are carrying a burden that has not been placed in the right hands. There is a specific type of burden that women carry with remarkable consistency. It is the burden of responsibility for others, for their children, their husband, their extended family, their community, their friendships, and for problems that are not theirs but somehow reached them and remained with them. And over time, this accumulation creates a tension that is not only emotional but spiritual. Because when you carry what is not yours to carry, you are implicitly saying to God, I will solve this. I do not need you for this. I have control over this part. And when this becomes a pattern, when your entire life begins to be managed through your own strength, without a real reference to divine providence, the soul becomes weighed down in a way that the body registers. The host that sticks in this context is like a mirror. It asks, what are you carrying that was never meant to be yours? What are you holding with your own hands that should be placed in God's hands? Padre Pio had an expression that he used with those under his spiritual direction when he noticed this pattern. You are trying to do God's work and your own work at the same time, and you are destroying yourself in both. Surrender in the Catholic spiritual tradition is not passivity. It is not crossing your arms and waiting for God to solve everything. It is doing your part with everything you have, and then opening your hands to what is beyond your part. It is the difference between working with God and working in God's place. Marlene was 49 years old and was the gravitational center of an entire family. 3 adult children with different problems, a husband who had become ill, an elderly mother who needed care, and she was in the middle of everything, functioning, managing, solving. She had not stopped going to Massachusetts. She had not stopped praying. But she had stopped truly resting in God, because there was no longer space in her mind or heart for anything other than the next problem to solve. On one specific Sunday, when the host stuck and she remained still for an involuntary moment, something happened. She could not explain it afterward in a completely rational way, but it was as if, in that second of pause, she felt the weight of everything she was carrying in a way she had never felt before. And together with that weight came a question that did not come from her. "Why are you carrying this alone?" She cried during Mass that Sunday for the first time in years. Not out of sadness, out of relief. The following week, she began a long and gradual process of learning to say no, to delegate, and to stop being the center of everyone's solutions. Not because she had given up on those she loved, but because she had understood that love does not require you to destroy yourself to prove that it is real. And for you, what are you carrying that is not yours to carry? It is not weakness to place in God's hands what is beyond your ability. It is exactly what communion invites you to do. The 6th and final warning is different from all the previous ones. It is not a sign of something that needs to be corrected. It is not a warning of danger. It is a calling. The host that sticks may be a sign that God wants more from you. Not more effort. Not more religious practice. But more depth. There is a moment in the spiritual life of some people when God, so to speak, stops the normal flow in order to create an intentional interruption. Not because something is wrong, but because the time has come for the next step that the person has not yet recognized as available to them. This next step can be different things for different people. For some, it is the call to a more contemplative prayer with fewer requests and more presence. For others, it is the call to some form of service or mission that they have been postponing. For others still, it is the call to a level of surrender that they have been negotiating, accepting some things from God while carefully keeping other parts of themselves protected. The host that sticks in this context is not an obstacle. It is an invitation. The pause it creates is not meant to correct something. It is meant to ask, are you ready for what comes next? Are you willing to go deeper than you have gone until now? Padre Pio said that God does not waste anything. No difficult moment, no spiritual dryness, no unexpected experience, not even a host that sticks. Everything can become a language between the soul and God for those who are willing to listen. The question is not whether that specific moment has a provable metaphysical meaning. The question is, are you willing to use it as a doorway? The question it opens can lead somewhere that is much more valuable than the answer itself. Joanna was 56 years old and described her faith as solid, but horizontal. She fulfilled everything: Mass, regular confession, prayer groups, works of charity. But there was a level of surrender that she had never reached. Not because of unwillingness, but because she had never understood that it was available to her. She associated deep mystical experiences with saints, religious sisters, and people who had a special vocation, not with herself. A married woman, a grandmother, a homemaker. During a weekend retreat at the final Mass, the host stuck in a way that made her stop. And in that pause, something reached her that she described this way. It was as if, for the first time, I understood that he was receiving me just as much as I was receiving him, that the encounter was real in both directions. This may seem obvious to those who study theology, but for Joanna it was a revelation that reorganized everything. Communion stopped being something she did and became something that happened between two people, her and God, with all the seriousness and intimacy that this implies. She did not become a mystic. She did not have visions. But something in her life of faith became more alive from that moment onward. And she attributed this turning point to that involuntary second when the host stuck and she was forced to stop and be completely present. Of all 6 warnings in this video, which one reached you the strongest? Which one spoke most directly to something you are experiencing right now? Keep that question. You do not need an immediate answer. Sometimes the right question brought honestly into prayer is itself the answer. 6 warnings. Deep distraction. Something unresolved between you and God. Spiritual dryness with a hidden purpose. Negative spiritual influence that needs to be addressed. A burden that is not yours to carry. And the invitation to go deeper. None of them is a condemnation. All of them are a language. The language of a real encounter that is not satisfied with the surface. Padre Pio spent decades beside the altar, looking at the faithful who approached to receive communion. And the question he asked, not with his voice, but through his entire life, was always the same. Do you know what you are receiving? Do you know who you are encountering? This video does not claim to answer for you, but it does intend to make you take this question more seriously than you did before you began watching. The next time you go to the altar, take these 6 warnings with you. Not as a list of worries, but as an invitation to real presence. And if the host sticks again, there is no need to rush to solve it. Stop for a second. Be there. Ask what that moment wants to say to your specific life at this specific moment. The answer may be one of the most important answers you have ever received. If this video helped you understand a little more about the Eucharistic host, share it with someone you know who takes the Eucharist seriously. Leave in the comments which of the 6 warnings reached you the strongest. And subscribe to the channel, because the next videos will continue along this path of spiritual depth that you deserve. Until the next video, and may each of your communions become an increasingly real encounter.